Good morning. It is Wednesday, November the 21st, and this is The Drill. Good morning. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States of America today, because I'm the only one that makes the presumption for the status quo. And this is the show that is for the butchers, the bakers, and the candlestick makers. So, conservatives, the idea with being a conservative is making the presumption for the status quo and asking what's wrong with the way things are. Now, when there's an obvious case for change, it would seem then, perhaps, to some people that conservatives no longer have a role to play. They just turn everything over to the liberals, to the socialists, who will then have at it and go ahead and change the things the way they see fit. Not so. The conservatives still have a role to play in the process of making a change. The left wants to make wholesale change. They want revolutionary change. They want to reform things completely, reform the entire country, reform entire industries. It is the job of the conservatives to look at the situation and ask themselves, and look at the situation rationally, realistically, and ask themselves whether or not it is necessary. In some cases it may be, but it needs to be looked at rationally, not just assumed that because change is indicated that it needs to be radical or revolutionary change. The example I want to use is the pharmaceutical industry. There's a lot of talk led by Donald Trump about reforming, basically, the pharmaceutical industry, that the pharmaceutical industry makes way too much profits, and that therefore, and this drug prices are way too high, and therefore we need to do something about reforming our laws with regards to pharmaceutical industries in order to bring drug prices down. When, as a conservative, that's an idea, but it's not a conservative way of looking at the problem. The issue is you look at the problem and ask, first of all, how do drugs come onto the market? There's a whole lot of rules and regulations that have to be followed. Then, once they do come on the market, the one thing that is so fascinating about the pharmaceutical industry, and it's the only place that I know of where this happens, is that as soon as a pharmaceutical company brings a drug to market, they get a monopoly on the sale of that particular drug for a certain period of time. They're able to get a trademark, or I forget exactly what the legal term is for it, but it's a monopoly. No one else can produce that drug. Let's take a look at the case of, more specifically, Viagra. Viagra comes to market. Pfizer, I believe, is the one that created Viagra. Pfizer gets to sell Viagra. Nobody else does. No one else gets to sell Viagra until a certain time has passed. After about, say, 10 years, then other people can sell Viagra, but they can't sell it, of course, as Viagra. But they can sell a generic form of Viagra. And that's when the prices go down. Before, when it was just Viagra, it's $30 a pill. Now, it's a fraction of that cost, because they sell, there's various companies out there selling sildenafil, which is the generic form of Viagra. And so they sell sildenafil, and they can sell it for a fraction of the price that Viagra is going for. So the prices start to come down. So it seems to me, as a conservative, instead of reforming the entire industry, it would probably be, and let me, before I draw the conclusion, let me use another example. Amazon. Amazon comes to market, and they started as a bookseller. Amazon, as soon as they came to market, were subject to competition. The second they came on the scene and said, "Hi, we're open for business," they're subject to competition. Everybody else that sells a product or service faces that. If you're McDonald's, as soon as you open your doors, you have to face potential competition from mom and pop shops or from Burger King, Carl's Jr., etc. McDonald's doesn't get to say, well, you know what? We're a drive-through place and we sell Big Macs, double-decker hamburgers or whatever. Nobody else gets to do that for the next 10 years. Imagine if McDonald's could do that. Imagine what the prices of their food would be. It would be outrageous until the 10-year limit had been reached, and then competitors can come into the market. Look at Amazon. Amazon is the same way. They're a bookseller. They came on to the market, and immediately they're facing potential competition. So what if they could say, you know what? We're the first booksellers online, and nobody else can compete with us. We're going to get a law passed that says for the next 10 years, there's going to be no competition. Wouldn't they be able to charge any price they wanted to? Wouldn't prices for those online books skyrocket? Well, of course they would. Especially if Amazon could come out and say, not only are we going to create a trademark for our product that's going to affect online retailers, but brick and mortar retailers as well. Nobody else. Imagine if whoever's the first bookseller, whether it was Barnes and Noble or whomever, they came out and did that and said, we're the first ones, so therefore, for the next 10 years, we are exempt from competition. What would happen to the prices? They'd be ridiculous. Nobody else gets to enjoy a functional monopoly in this country except the pharmaceutical industry. It used to be the telephone company, and in certain cases, the electric or the utility companies also are basically functional monopolies. There's no competition. You're in Southern California. The only competition you've really got is municipalities. The city of Pasadena produces its own power, but other than that, if you're living in a city that doesn't produce its own power, you've got to get it from Southern California Edison. You have no choice. Okay, so you got to pay, and that's part of the reason it's regulated. The industries are regulated. But the point is that the pharmaceutical industries are the way to change it. You want to bring the prices down instead of reforming the entire industry. Here's an idea. Why don't we take away their monopoly? Why doesn't the government say, okay, we're going to modify the law that says that you get to sell your product exclusively for 7, 8, 10 years, and from now on, as soon as you bring the product to market, it's subject to competition. Would that bring the prices down? I would think it would. Now, there may be some very good reasons why that's not such a workable idea, but the point is, from a conservative standpoint, that's the way we would look at the situation. We look at it in a very tailored and narrow way. Look at the problems in tailored and narrow ways. In situations like this where it's called for. If at the end of the day there aren't any tailored or narrow solutions to the problem, then and only then do we look at wholesale change, at reforming or revolutionizing the industry. So, be back in a minute. Thank you very much, and welcome back. And I'm reading from the Ayn Rand lexicon. Today's concept is corollaries. A corollary is a self-evident implication of already established knowledge. Many of the most important truths in philosophy are neither primary axioms nor theorems susceptible of discursive proof. Rather, they are corollaries, most often corollaries of axioms. Always good stuff. So now I'm going to, instead of taking a break here, I'm going to go ahead right into the next book. I've found one that's called the 13 Tactics. Let me see. 13 Tactics for Realistic Radicals by Saul Alinsky. And actually, it's basically what they've done is taken rules for radicals and boiled them down into these 13 tactics. And Saul Alinsky was an organizer in the 30s, a socialist, although I don't know that he called himself such, but he acted like a socialist. He's a socialist. Or he's a useful idiot, but he's still a socialist. So this is from let me see, I'm guessing, well, it doesn't say. And there's a quote at the top of the page. "We will either find a way or make one," said by Hannibal. Tactics means doing what you can with what you have. Tactics are those consciously deliberate acts by which human beings live with each other and deal with the world around them. In the world of give and take, tactics is the art of how to take and how to give. Here, our concern is not with the tactic of taking, how the have-nots can take power away from the haves. Here our concern is with the tactic of taking, how the have-nots can take power away from the haves. For an elementary illustration of tactics, take parts of your face as the point of reference: your eyes, your ears, and your nose. First, the eyes. If you have organized a vast, mass-based people's organization, you can parade it visibly before the enemy and openly show your power. Second, the ears. If your organization is small in numbers, then do what Gideon did. Conceal the members in the dark, but raise a din and clamor that will make the listener believe that your organization's numbers are bigger than what they appear. Third, the nose. If your organization is too tiny even for noise, stink up the place. Always remember the first rule of power tactics. Power is not only what you have, but what the enemy thinks you have. The second rule is never go outside the experience of your people. When an action or tactic is outside the experience of the people, the result is confusion, fear, and retreat. It also means a collapse of communication, as we have noted. The third rule is, wherever possible, go outside the experience of the enemy. Here you want to create confusion, fear, and retreat. General William T. Sherman, whose name still causes a frenzied reaction throughout the South, provided a classic example of going outside the enemy's experience. Until Sherman, military tactics and strategies were based on standard patterns. All armies had fronts, rears, flanks, lines of communication, and lines of supply. Military campaigns were aimed at such standard objectives as rolling up the flanks of the enemy army, or cutting the lines of supply or lines of communication, or moving around to attack from the rear. When Sherman cut loose on his famous march to the sea, he had no front or rear lines of supplies or any other lines. He was on the loose and living on the land. The South, confronted with this new form of military invasion, reacted with confusion, panic, terror, and collapse. Sherman swept on to inevitable victory. It was the same tactic that, years later in the early days of World War II, the Nazi Panzer tank divisions emulated in their far-flung sweeps into enemy territory, as did our own General Patton with the American 3rd Armored Division. The fourth rule is, make the enemy live up to their own book of rules. You can kill them with this, for they no more obey their own rules than the Christian church can live up to Christianity. They can no more live up to their own rule or obey their own rules than the Christian church can live up to Christianity. The fourth rule carries within it the fifth rule: ridicule is man's most potent weapon. It is almost impossible to counterattack ridicule. Also, it infuriates the opposition, who then react to your advantage. The sixth rule is, a good tactic is one that your people enjoy. If your people are not having a ball doing it, there is something very wrong with the tactic. The seventh rule, a tactic that drags on too long becomes a drag. Man can sustain militant interest in any issue for only a limited time, after which it becomes a ritualistic commitment, like going to church on Sunday mornings. New issues and crises are always developing, and one's reaction becomes, quote, well, my heart bleeds for those people and I'm all for the boycott, but after all, there are other important things in life, unquote. And there it goes. The eighth rule, keep the pressure on with different tactics and actions and utilize all events of the period for your purpose. The ninth rule, the threat is usually more terrifying than the thing itself. The 10th rule, the major premise for tactics is the development of operations that will maintain a constant pressure upon the opposition. It is this unceasing pressure that results in the reactions from the opposition that are essential for the success of the campaign. It should be Remember not only that the action is in the reaction, but the action is itself the consequence of reaction, and of reaction to the reaction ad infinitum. The pressure produces the reaction, and constant pressure sustains the action. So the interesting thing about this, and the reason I'm reading it, is to illustrate the point that this is what the left is about. This is not, it's not about abortion. He doesn't say anything about abortion in here. He doesn't say anything about immigration. He doesn't say anything about the environment. He doesn't say anything about the budget. He doesn't say anything about any of the supposed issues that the left in this country supposedly cares about. His whole thing is that there are friends and enemies, or allies and enemies, and that those people that are not on your side are the enemy, i.e. conservatives. That we are the enemy, not the opposition, not the loyal opposition, not an opponent or somebody that you are going to be competing with, a competitor of any sort, the enemy. And usually when you're dealing with somebody that's an enemy, you're looking to destroy them. So this is, again, what they're looking at. And what they're looking at, again, is creating this type of movement, having all these tactics towards what end? Socialist hell. What they like to call socialist paradise. But in reality is socialist hell. Get organized. The individual counts for nothing. It is only groups of people that make a difference. False. But again, this is to illustrate where these folks are coming from. So, back in a minute. Thank you very much. Second book that goes along with this one is called Rules for Radicals Defeated. And let me see if I can find Jeff Hedgepath, a.k.a. Alinsky Defeater. But he's the author of this book. Chapters, it's got 5 chapters. First one is, who was Alinsky and what is Rules for Radicals and why should I care? 2, to use or not to use, the morality of Alinsky tactics. 3, the 13 main Alinsky tactics explained. 4, principles for defeating the Alinsky tactics. And 5, the road ahead. And it says, disclaimer, anything contained in the book that is not documented is strictly the opinion of the author. So let's see. There's chapter 1 is divided into sections. So I'm going to go ahead and read section 1, which is about Saul Alinsky. Chapter 1, who was Alinsky, what is Rules for Radicals, and why should I care? And there's a quote, victorious warriors win first and then go to war, while defeated warriors go to war first and then seek to win. Sun Tzu, The Art of War. Saul Alinsky, the days of traditional politics are over. Conservatives would be well served to abandon the acquiescent political hand-wringing and build the skills necessary to engage and defeat their opponents. In the age of Obama, politics has morphed into one part traditional political strategy mixed with one or more parts Saul Alinsky's rules for radicals. We must find a way to defeat our opponents without becoming them. Very important. To defeat their morally bankrupt schemes, it will be necessary to learn their tactics well. Simply learning their tactics and then turning them back on them, however, will make us no better than those we oppose. Learn the tactics we must, but we must also supplement our understanding of Alinsky with morally sound principles designed specifically to defeat them. Couldn't have said it better myself. Let's see, back to the book. This book will provide you with an understanding of Alinsky's tactics and morally sound principles to oppose them. The name Saul Alinsky seems to have been resurrected from obscurity in the past few years. He was a community organizer whose work ranged from the 1930s to the 1970s. He died in 1973. And was most famous for his book, Rules for Radicals, wherein he outlined a set of tactics for revolution. His goal was to empower the quote, have-nots, unquote, in such a way that they could overpower the, quote, haves, unquote, and create a new, fairer society. If it sounds a lot like Marxism to you, well, you're not alone. Although his book has remained somewhat popular over the years, it was the emergence of Barack Obama on the national political scene that truly brought Alinsky back into the limelight. Even though he died in 1973, Rules for Radicals became the Bible for community organizers like Barack Obama. As you will see, the tactics taught in that book are both ruthless and effective. When I first joined Twitter in July of 2009 under the name of Alinsky Defeater, it was still quite common for people to ask me what my name meant. As you can imagine, I'm rarely asked that question these days. Before Barack Obama ran for president, few had heard the name Saul Alinsky or heard of his most famous book, Rules for Radicals. The name Saul Alinsky is not such a mystery these days. While many on both sides of the political aisle have never heard of Saul Alinsky before Barack Obama began running for president, there were the devoted few who were quite aware of Alinsky and his tactics well before that time. Many of us first learned of Alinsky during the presidency of Bill Clinton. After all, Hillary had written her senior thesis at Wellesley on the Alinsky model. Subsequently, she had been offered a job working for Alinsky, a job she turned down. I've supplied references at the back of the book, but if you're looking for Hillary's thesis, it was entitled, There is Only the Fight, an analysis of the Alinsky model. So just who was this Saul Alinsky and why is he so revered in leftist circles? I will keep my biographical sketch of Alinsky extremely brief because it is not the man I wish to counter in this book, but his ideas. Saul David Alinsky, born in January 30th, 1909 and died June 12th, well actually it says 1972, is commonly referred to as the father of community organizing. As David Horowitz says, his preferred self-description was rebel, and his entire life was devoted to organizing a revolution in America to destroy a system he regarded as oppressive and unjust. By profession, he was a community organizer, the same term employed by his most famous disciple, Barack Obama, to describe himself. Alinsky's early career was that of a criminal sociologist. His biographer, Sanford Horwitz, paints a picture of a man working for a prison system, but more attuned to the plight of the inmates than to a law-abiding society. He found a kinship with the inmates, and he found himself blaming society for their, quote, misfortune, unquote, rather than blaming the individuals for their own behavior. This philosophy would permeate the rest of Alinsky's life's work. He always viewed the problems of poverty and crime through the prism of what society had done to the criminal rather than what the criminal had done to his victim. In other words, determinism. The idea that the individual is powerless, the individual has no free will, and is forced to do what he or she does by powers beyond his or her control. Back to the book. Becoming bored with his work as a sociologist, Alinsky eventually moved on to work in the back of the yards in Chicago, an extremely poor, heavily immigrant area made famous in Upton Sinclair's famous book, The Jungle. It was in this tough atmosphere that Alinsky cut his teeth as a community organizer and formed many of the principles for community organization that would make up his first book, Reveille for Radicals, the predecessor to his more famous work, Rules for Radicals. Rules for Radicals was written as a guidebook for radicals. It embodies general principles by which revolution can be accomplished. Just what the revolution's end was to be is never defined by Alinsky. He describes his work by saying, quote, "In this book I propose certain general observations, propositions, and concepts of the mechanics of mass movements and the various stages of the cycle of action and reaction in revolution." And again, unquote. And again, quote, "Here I propose to present an arrangement of certain facts and general concepts of change, a step forward toward a science of revolution," unquote. It is this same general approach against which I intend to defend. I will not offer specifics any more than Alinsky did, but rather general principles by which conservatives can defend themselves against these insidious and unscrupulous tactics. To my knowledge, no one has yet set forth such a generalized defense against Alinsky tactics. And that's where this section ends, and I think that it's again, he hits the nail right on the head, hits things right on the button. Also, one of the things I wanted to mention when I was just after I got done reading a little bit of Saul Alinsky's book, or the Yeah, the 13 tactics, was that if you'll notice, the vast majority, as a matter of fact, all of it, that all of these tactics that Saul Alinsky outlined that I was reading, the 13 of them, we only got through 10, by the way, but those 10, all of them are psychological or psychologistic in nature. The whole thing that the left is trying to do is psych you out, make you believe things that are not real. And that's another reason why I refer to the left as narcissists. That's constantly what the narcissist wants to do. The narcissist is, and when the narcissist engages in that particular type of behavior, it's called gaslighting. And that the left is constantly engaged in gaslighting. And then also the author of this particular book, Rules for Radicals Defeated, is Hedgepath, is saying that he's not sure what the ultimate end is. Well, we know what the ultimate end is, if you understand anything about Marxism and socialism, is the worldwide socialist revolution resulting in socialist paradise, or what I refer to as socialist hell. So, but at this time, that brings us to the conclusion of another episode of The Drill, and until next time, thank you very much for listening, and have a great day.